Romain, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you on, and yeah, thanks for giving up some time today.
Yeah, Andy, thank you for the invitation. So really appreciate. Thanks.
So, as is kind of typical tradition on podcasts, obviously we normally get people to go through their background. Would you be able to kind of walk us through maybe your career moves and give us some context into where you've been work-wise through to what you're doing in the current day?
Yeah, I like to, I would say, define myself with different arts. My first art is I'm a clinician, a practitioner, so sport physio from the beginning of my career. So I work in La Tour Hospital, which is the Swiss Olympic Medical Center in Geneva. From that, I'm lead now the foot ankle services, meaning that I try to, I would say, create or foot ankle assessment, foot ankle rehab strategy, some private consulting work also around, I would say, that topics, which is, I would say, my kind of expertise. And in regards to that, after I have only lower limb rehabilitation treatments, so hip and knee, also tendinopathy, and that's all. In parallel to this, I'm currently doing a PhD under the supervision of JB Morin, so in France, in Saint-Etienne. I'm in the final step, so just writing my manuscript currently. So I've done all my studies and experimentation. So we talk about that. And the topic was forefoot strength and its relation to, I would say, force production and transmission during explosive tasks. So sprinting, cutting, and jumping. And I do some. The third art is education courses, conference, congress, private courses. I would say in Europe, but also now also in Australia, for examples. And my last is much more also now as part of this kind of expertise, consulting work with private sporting organization. So mainly in soccer, rugby, and track and field here. So in terms of, I would say, case series for some athletes, methodology of assessment, for example, I went to a big club here in France to show to the physio and the agency how to use force platforms in rehab and performance, I would say, settings. And so, yeah, that's mine, I would say, for art. So, yeah, for big art to be
Yes.
very busy, I would say.
And what kind of sparks the foot and ankle sort of passion for you, or professional interest? Were at a certain time were you working with lots of foot and ankle injuries, and it kind of went from there, or what caused it?
Yeah, that's really good. I am really passionate about lower limb, but why the foot and ankle? It's, I would say, much more from my master thesis, where I was with a big guy around foot and ankle complex, which it's, yeah, my mentor around that topic, and I was very I would say amazed by the importance of the foot and ankles from a biomechanical perspective when you look at all the research. But in reverse, the, I would say, discreditation or less, I will say, work on that topic around, foot ankle training, foot ankle rehab, much more less, I would say, strong or a very insightful approaches around that topic. And if you talk about injuries, so for me, lateral ankle sprain and chronic ankle instability is one of the most traumatic injury in sport, but the most, I will say, the first pathology where everybody don't care currently. So really rapid return to play, tape and play approaches, and so on. So yeah, I think there are big gap between the importance and after the how we manage this complex and so on. So yeah, and the last thing, it's just that when you understand foot ankle biomechanics and try to understand, because sometimes I read paper, I don't understand anything at all. When you understand foot ankle biomechanics, everything is pretty simple after. Knee simple, hip simple. Yeah, foot ankle is huge. 26 bone, 33 individual bone joints. Sorry, and so everything is pretty complex between the interaction of forefoot to rear foot, the role of the tibia, the arch, and so on. So, from I would say biomechanical perspective, also it's for me pretty very insightful and relevant as a biomechanist also.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I always think I'm going to say our just as a massive sweeping generalization, but I think it's one of those areas that rehab-wise, we see a lot of foot and ankle injuries in sport, but we almost sort of we're quite blasé and overlook the technicalities around it. We sort of know that it's anatomically and mechanically a complex area, but almost like we see so many injuries in that area that people you sort of take the area for granted, and we put so much more historically, I think, energy in looking at simpler joints and obsessing over how we rehab perhaps simpler areas than an area like the foot and ankle, which we know is complex and common. So it always seems like a bit of a weird paradox there.
Yeah, totally agree on that. But also, it's funny because now as a consultant in this area, for sure, many times, it's funny to see as after my assessment and so on that some basic foundation is not just there, and some people just think that he's still re-injured, or he still suffer from pain and so on. But you have some, for me, basic foundation that we'll talk about that it's just not there. So just start by that, and for sure you will improve things, so on. So sometimes also we try to be very generic and light, and from the other aspect, sometimes I saw that you try to overcomplicate, try to isolate, the intrinsic from the medial arch, and not working all the muscle together and so on. So some tricky things around the twos also, try to coordinate and try to very tricky thing in terms of exercise also. But that's the two vision that I have also around some, I would say, complex case area.
Yeah. In terms of sort of technical topics today, one of the things we're going to talk about is obviously the foot and ankle, and cover a lot of sort of biomechanics and assessment and training qualities of it. Can you sort of, to start off with, maybe set the scene, and maybe talk about perhaps some of the forces and biomechanics of the foot and ankle, and I guess ultimately in the context of how that contributes towards explosive tasks. So, setting the physical demand scene of the foot and ankle.
Yeah. So to start very, I would say, from a simple vision, we know that when you hit the ground, so during locomotion, when I say locomotion, it could be walking, running, sprinting, cutting, and so on. So when you hit the ground, you have an absorption phases when you have to dissipating energy, and in reverse after you have the propulsion, which allow you to generate energy. So I will say negative work and positive work from that. And in regard to the foot and ankle, we know that I would say the rear foot. When I say rear foot, it's the subtalar joint and the talocrural joint, which is much more the ankle in terms from an anatomical view. Plus the metatarsal have a role in absorption. So and we know that when you hit the ground, you have the arch that play a big role in store and release of energy. So the first half is just that the arch, I would say, store energy by lengthening. And after for the propulsion phase, the arch recoiled here, and the propulsion is made by the right foot. So the recoiling of the arch actually do some power, so positive power. And if you look at the forefoot, so only toes, we know that the toes basically have only negative work during all the stance phase. So we don't have many positive work coming from the toes. It's you really always absorption, so that the toes keep, I would say, the contact with the ground. So to counteract, the ground reaction force that want to extend the toes, but you just keep the ground to flex them. So it's really an absorption from the major proportion on the toes. And so all the power coming from the foot is around the right foot. So all the power, positive power. And for sure, after, if you look at about the ankle, you have the calf and the talocrural joint that play this positive work. But positive work is so the calf and right foot, and absorption is the rear foot and the right foot from the all stays, but also all the toes, here. And that's why around my PhD we basically try to improve the forefoot in order to better have a transfer between the toes and the right foot, so that all the absorption that you can dissipate in your toes, so the ability to maintain the toes to the ground, allow you to have much more right foot power. So that's what the biomechanical perspective around that. And so around this absorption and propulsion, here we know that if you look at any biomechanical study in any explosive task, so acceleration, max speed, cutting, for example, and you put some marker on the guys and look at what is the contribution of every joint in the lower limb, you will find that if foot and ankle, it's pretty big. It has pretty huge importance during the stand phase into this negative and positive work. So, and because of some biomechanical marker systems, so very simple, just say that the foot is pretty just rigid, which is not totally true. We also are in the area today where we overestimate the calf work, meaning that when you look at the study and say that, I don't know, the foot and ankle, it's 40% and 40% came from the calf, because of the marker system, is not true. It's not totally true. So we also forget that the foot deforms, deform, and it's not purely rigid. It's really mobile structure, so dissipating energy and generating energy through the foot structure, so extrinsic and intrinsic foot muscle. So that's why also that we have to put all this together. So the calf and the extrinsic and intrinsic in terms of our reflection, because it's just about quality of study and the marker system that you have. It's really complicated to have a modelize the foot in terms of biomechanics because of all the joints. So sometimes we oversimplified it, but it's overestimate just the ankle, I would say, and the calf. So that's why that when you put all together, the contribution it's pretty huge in terms of calf intrinsic foot muscle. And the last big role, if you are in biomechanics, in the spring, so the spring mass models of the lower limb, so the capacity to store and release energy, to have this I would say elastic quality. We know that the Achilles tendon and the arch have really strong or important spring quality. So that's why also the foot ankle complex, in terms of the spring mass model and constant speed locomotion, so Vmax or I don't know, pogos, for example, or hopping. We know that also the foot ankle crippling has a huge role because of the, I would say, structural, architectural foot and muscular tendinous aspect also.
As someone who obviously treats, but also is an educator, does courses, and I guess consults too. When you say that we probably overestimate the calf component of the foot and ankle complex, I'm sure the sort of obvious question people ask you is, how strong does the calf need to be, and how strong does the foot need to be? It's probably like, because over the last couple of years we've been much better at going, okay, these are the sort of seated calf, standing calf values we need. But I'm sure when you then disrupt people's practice with that statement, they go to how strong does the foot need to be. How do you then sort of answer that question? Because I'm sure it comes up.
Really great question. In what I've said, it's just to say that overestimate don't mean that, just mean that in your reflection, we know that for example, the absorption, where we know that the foot and ankle, it's pretty important. We know that, the powerhouse muscle is the soleus, for example, because it has huge vertical support. We know that pretty simply, but it's not just the soleus. What I want to mention is you want to improve your absorption, for example, capacity around your foot ankle complex. If the vertical, I would say, support is really created by your soleus, but your foot deform in 3D, and for example, during cutting, on during even horizontal task or linear curve, sprint linear, you have a lot of frontal and transversal plane, also motion. Or just if you look at the foot deformation during a vertical jump, high takeoff, that this big pronation to stop the body and so on. So that's why I mentioned that if we say that the foot is pretty rigid, you will say that if you want to absorb force, it's just about the soleus, but in fact, frontal plane and transversal plane absorption is really made by two big extrinsic, which are the big, I would say, midfoot stabilizers, so tip ends and tip post, and it's really some forgotten muscle in terms of evaluation and training. So that's why it's not just about for sure the soleus in terms of evaluation and training, and because the foot deform in 3D, and because the arch, as I said, store and release an energy, and the big stabilizer around this region is really the tip post and tips and for example. So that's why overestimate is say, okay, if I want to improve this quality, I have to check and to have in mind that there's these three muscle and not just one. And for example, in some sport specificity, you want to for example, when you do a track and field, what we know from the track and field perspective is that because the left foot is always inside the curve, the pronation moment is much more important than the right foot. And if you walk or evaluate track and field, for example, athletes, I want him, maybe to have much more tip post on inverters, strengths, max strength, because I know that from his, I would say, sport activity, he has much more pronation moments, or you have to control much more, pronation moments around the arch. So that's what I mean by don't overestimate or don't only focus on this. And for propulsion, we know that when you're reducing MTP joint strength stiffness by reduce or totally deleted the activation of the MTP tooth flexors, you know that you impair the calf positive work. So that's why also that if you want to, have a good projection, good propulsion around doing by the calf, and the calf is the big guy. So gastro for much more horizontal projection, or soleus for the vertical projection. Yeah, that's the big powerhouse muscle. But if you don't have a bit of transmission by the forefoot and midfoot region, you can have also some impairment. And for some guy, that's also the topic. And what a funny thing just to do, it's to do perform heel raises on a flat surface, and just put an heel raises on the inclined plate. And when you're just doing heel raises on the inclined plate, or extend the MTP joint, so like the famous, I would say, rat lift exercise for plantar fasciopathy, or you have a dorsiflex position of the toes, and you do it. We know that extension of the toes during it rises increase the midfoot moment, and increase the negative work from the forefoot, as I told you. But it's increase the contribution of the midfoot and the forefoot joint, and it rises, and you have some really athlete that totally strong, so can perform many reps, on flat surface. But when you increase the contribution of the foot during, this kind of task, that totally destroy, or that totally don't suck it to do it. So yeah, that's what I mean. But also transmission. So not just the calf, but calf, foot anterior lever, meaning calf and midfoot forward. Yeah.
I think sometimes I'd be the first person to put my hand up and say I've been guilty of this, but I think we label certain tests or exercises, don't we? So we commonly say calf push for a closed chain force plate test around the calf, but really, I think if we actually just called it like a plantar flexion test, we would start going, what makes up plantar flexion? Also the rigid foot. So I sometimes think we label a test and then we sort of narrow our focus or our inclusion of what can actually affect it at times.
That's the part of when I say having a forefoot strength or stiffness, just mean that we know that it's increase the anteriorization of the force production, so it increases the gear ratio, which is the moment R between the ground reaction force and your ankle joint, and the moment R between your Achilles and your ankle joint. And we know also this for footwear study, when you increase forefoot longitudinal bending stiffness, that change the calf mechanics, that change also the velocity of contraction of the calf. So because if you have a good calf and a good gear ratio on an interiorization of your force application, it will be better. That's the things. But is what I say also with the super shoes or the stiffness shoes, for example, and it's that will allow your calf to, I would say, biomechanically a more efficient way. But if you don't have calf, the super shoes can transmit, nothing also. So that's why I'm always say, okay, calf and foot, we will see, work both in together, or just work on the calf without I will say an aspect of on the forefoot. So for example, it rises, just basic it rises is if you don't change something on the toes or on the incline plate and so on, that's much more calf focus in terms of not putting first ray or midfoot joint during this exercise. It's your clinical reasoning around that, but at the beginning of the reasoning is calf and transmission. Yeah.
So today, if we maybe, I guess, so that everything becomes really applied, because obviously there'll be a lot of anatomy along the way. If we can maybe go through absorption, propulsion, and sort of spring qualities of the foot and ankle.
Yeah.
First, we often see content and talk about absorbing force at the foot and ankle complex. For you, how do you, I guess to set the scene, how do you assess that? And then maybe afterwards we can get to, the sort of training aspect of it.
Yeah. Um, that's a good. The first I would say my understanding of farmer work around this is isolation. So what I tell you, it's okay. Which are the biggest foot and ankle muscle absorbers? Try to assess them. So, for example, the Soleus, I use the force platform assessment. So, in knee flexion, so 1990, the big thing was what I want to keep my standardization around ankle or foot and ankle in neutral position. And you read some paper, you have some guy that tell you that you have to have some dorsiflex position and so on. It's just that dorsiflex position, you don't really know at how many. For some, if you use max dorsiflex position, you can have really lot of difference between max dorsiflex position on the right and left side, for example. And we know that the force change between just having 5 degrees or 10 degrees more of dorsiflex is pretty huge. You can have 150 newtons of difference, 200, just by 5 degrees of dorsiflexion. That's why I always standardize in neutral position. And for me, it's pretty important to standardize this. So to be always in the same force length relationships. And if I have some asymmetry, I know that it's not because of, that I'm not at the same level of the force length relationship. So that's, for me, a big advice that I will give to everybody. And I know, and I pretty know that, yeah, the neutral position is not the best angle for torque production or force production. We know that the calf is much, and if we talk about the Soleus has is peak force around, between 10 and 20 degrees of dorsiflexion. So I know that I'm not at the peak, but I'm at a standardization, angle, sorry, that allow me, to if I found asymmetry, I know that that's came for this. And after for tip post and tip ends, I use either kinetics or I use traction and dynamometer. So in propulsive position where I put traction HHD on the foot and also have a max isometrics strength in neutral position for tips ends. And for tip post, that's the same. I can use isokinetic because I'm lucky to have 3 isokinetics where I'm working, so I can work on that. But with an dynamometer also, to have much more tip post, you have to perform an inversion moment in an ankle in max plantar flexion. But with the same advice that I give to the Soleus, if you don't have the same, plantar flexion between left and right, doing neutral position, doing an inversion assessments, in neutral position. So yeah, so that's part of my assessment from an isolation perspective. So, if my clinical reasoning, I would say, put me in, okay, I want to check these absorption qualities around the foot. I will check this muscle first in isolation and comparisons for asymmetry. Yeah, but the big thing is to have some norms, so to know what is good or basic strengths of, a good standard strengths. So we know that for Solis, that's depend of acceleration and endurance sport, but from I will say competitive sport, that's is not totally just endurance like long distance runner and so on. I will go to 180% of body weight, and 1.8 of body weight. It's net force. And what I say net force is pretty important because I always divide subtracting the peak by my baseline tension, which is not performed by my, I would say, by my active contraction. So that's why when I discuss also with some guys that doing some solid things, they always just hit the max peak, but not subtracting the baseline, which where because I use a belt around the knee, to have this isometric thing. And when you increase the tension of the belt, for sure that develop a force around the foot on the force platform. So that's why I always talk about net force when I perform isometrics contractions. And for tips ends, what a good starter, it's around 45% of body weight. So isometrics in neutral position, and for tips pause is around 35% of body weight, which is my standard here. And in relation to that, you have some much more, I would say, functional objective. So I really like so you can use force platforms, so vertical jump, and for example, drop jump or pogo jump, where you can have the absorption phase of the jump and see also if you have some deficit in a much more, functional perspective. And you can also have great tool, which is our phones, slow motion, and our iPhone, which is for me crazy. If you just, do some running acceleration of your cutting and you put your phone, you also can find some great things, about the deformation of the foot or the foot move during this first half stance phase, and manage also, your evaluation around much more, I would say, subjective when it's come, to kinematics and slow motion and so on. But you can also have this aspect around that in terms of the foot ankle absorbing quality. Well, that's my vision around this. Yeah.
And obviously, like, people's assessment then prompts what they then do in terms of treatment or training. But, void of context, is there anything, we should know from a training perspective for training absorption?
Yeah. But the first thing for me, it came your clinical reasoning. You put you in the I would say mindset to, okay, I want to improve my foot ankle absorption or not. If yes, which muscle has to be worked? And sometimes, it's not coming from the foot and ankle. The problem of absorption is coming from the proximal joint. So we know that after foot and ankle absorber, you have the quadriceps, which is a big absorber for sure, and the gluteus maximus. So, it's when sometimes I say, okay, from an isolation perspective, that's pretty good here. But after, in regards to training, that's the same philosophy, where for me, the first, it's isolation, when you want to really isolate solace and T-spots, tips, and in regard to your evaluation. So you can work on the 3, can work on 1 or 2 and whatever. That's depend also of if you have some, structural deficit, meaning you have some kind of atrophy. And I talk about that around, having previous foot ankle surgery or removing from a cast and so on. Or you have much more maximal strength orientation of your training. And for me, the big thing around this muscle is that they are pretty strong, the 3, and people are underload completely this during rehab. So yeah, the soleus is the powerhouse muscle of this complex. So if you don't have a Smith machine, if you don't have a rack with an isometric thing, if you don't have a leg extension in many ways. It would be very, very difficult to target this, but that's why we always sometimes, feel found that the soleus is weak. It's also because in many, many sittings, even sometimes in sports structure or rehab sports structure, we don't have the systems to overload properly this muscle. So that's the thing. And in coming up to tip post and tips hands, I think that some great tool like power pulley, shin bar, tips, and this where you can put load. It's pretty for me really interesting tools that you can have on the market, because it's allow you to have this to put the same principle that you will put on a leg extension for the quadriceps or on the press or on the squat. It's allow you, to have good things around max strength, or hypertrophy in regards to that. So yeah, that's what I'm using to increase the foundation of force around this muscle. And after, my coupling approach, it's to put the three together. So that's why after I use might foot braking, might foot landing. So I want my athletes, for example, or my patient to be able to, to absorb force in with a much more, I would say, functional movement, like drop landing here. When I want might foot, we say ground strike interaction, and I want, that my heel is not dropping here. And if you want to increase tip post or tips hands contribution, doing a might foot landing, might foot braking on a incline plate will, increase the pronation moment. It's really good things. And the traditional method could be a 2-1, so start on jump on two leg and absorb on one leg. Could be shock method, where you have increase a little bit the drop height also. But if you increase the drop height, you will increase, your knee flexion. And what you want to do with might foot landing or might foot braking is you want to have perfectly the knee extended position if you work on vertical things. And if you want to might foot braking, have knee flexion and break break with your foot. You put much more emphasis on the soleus, but you know that you will have also the quadriceps and so on. And so yeah, that's my coupling approach. And yeah, the functional approach is, perform tasks that is made of absorption of negative work, so drop landing, sharp cutting, deceleration. That's the thing. But if you don't have the motors and the materials, you can do, 1,000 hour of deceleration or sharp cutting. You won't improve your phonograph absorption if you don't have the muscle that has pretty a good target and a good strength norms around that. So that's why I'm always say that, okay, go and check on the isolation what it is, and after we can talk about if have much more functional or performing much more funny, because it's always the discussion around funny. It's totally boring, I know, to work on your soleus for an isolation, or to work on the tip post and tips hand, but rehab is not Disneyland. It's rehab is not always funny. I know that many people prefer to do drop landing or deceleration during, but we don't have, or we should be very careful around, this concept of, I don't want to bring, my athletes to make always some funny thing, Instagram thing and so on because of, but so that's why I think that this isolation, coupling and things allow me, you can work on the two approaches together, but sometimes you have to focus on this here. And isolation for me, it's what is sometimes missing because we underload it, and because we say, okay, that's boring, and we will go some funny thing. But you don't improve thing by sometimes, if you don't have the cars to drive, you don't have the car to drive. So you want to drive because it's much more funny to drive. But yeah, I want to build first your motor to can drive at this speed. So yeah.
Just before we move on to propulsion and just sort of based on some of what you're saying about the boring motors, with
Yeah.
with the Soleus, when you're at your sort of 90 position, has that changed maybe some of the normative standards that you'd expect compared to maybe some of the common standards we see, knowing that practitioners are cranking people into dorsiflexion to get the alignment?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So that's why because in my in one article, which I wrote an article in Aspetar, which I call this miracles, and the ace of miracles is solid strength for ACL rehab, and I put my norms, so 1.7 as a starter, and yeah, it's a 1.7 in neutral position, and the net force. Yeah. So if you so a 1.7, I think that a 1.7, because I have I have this position, it's maybe 2.1 for a guy that evaluated in dorsiflex position. So that's why we like norm, or I think norm is important. But I always say to when I teach, or to my colleagues, and or to some guys that I work with, to say, okay, if you want to have some norm together, we have to have the same evaluation, because if we don't have the same evaluation, we don't, talk about the same story. So, your norms could be much more higher for me, or could be really less for what I'm doing. So that's why I want always, put some methodology, or just instruction to say, okay, I say to you this norm, but is this with these tools, with these settings, and with this, force length relationship. So for sure, yeah, if you have in dorsiflex max position, I will go much more higher in terms of norms. For me, yeah. If I for example, I forget this neutral position, and I evaluate a guys in dorsiflex position, and I found 1.7. For me, that's not enough. In regards to what I told you. So yeah, I think it's pretty important around the Soleus. Yeah.
Cool. No, I appreciate that. And thanks for the extra clarity, because I know there'll be people that have just got their heads around how strong the Soleus needs to be in one position, and then it changes their narrative of it. From absorbing and force attenuation to the propulsive foot and ankle complex. Maybe if we go through the same pattern, how do you assess that, and then how does that influence how you train it as well?
Yeah. To come back to just Soleus, yeah, you just have to tell to someone that your Soleus is 2.5 body weight in any position. That's a good for sure. Yeah. So in terms of propulsion, so I told you that the foot dissipating energy. So the big three are the three guys that we spoke about. And for the propulsion, we know that the calf, it's important for generating positive work around the foot and ankles. So vertical projection is always the Soleus also, and when you go to horizontal projection, it's much more the gastrocnemius. So that's this. And as I told you, MTP flexor, or forefoot strength, and that's what the part of my PhD thesis around this. It's the transmission, or sometimes also the production. So as I told you, the midfoot is the propulsor of the foot, or is the region of the foot that performing positive work with the calf. So the isolation, it's the same. So working on evaluating. So if you have the Soleus, you also have the Soleus for, I would say propulsion for a vertical perspective. But you have to evaluate much more the calf in global, so calf in knee extension. I know that's the lateral ankle iso push is, we are in the area where it's also all about ankle iso push in the lateral settings. But to tell you the truth, I'm not a big fan. I tried it a lot. I'm not a big fan for, I would say, many reasons. The first thing is that it's pretty variable. Or my own, I would say, way to evaluate it, I don't find the same coefficient of variation that Natera, for example. And also the back and the back and the shoulder, it should be also I will say, discomfortable or for some guys painful, and that, it's the limit of this test here. So that's why I'm using isokinetics. So that's my goal, to assess proper torque around the foot and ankle in knee extension. But if you don't have isokinetics, I think that having a Smith machine and performing a 5 RM, it's a good one. And one of my norm around that, it's having approximately 400% of body weight, 400 or 410% of body weight on your shoulder, on one leg, on a Smith machine, performing a 5 RM. I think that's a good strength norm or standard norm. And one of the important things when it comes to this heel raises assessment, it's to have a clear instruction. So vertical projection, non-knee flexion, being at max flexion, plantar flexion each rep. That's why I'm creating, a custom-made things where I put not a barbell, but a little band under the heel on the first rep. So the athlete performing the first max rep, I put my feedback around this heel rise 8, and that's why I know if at each rep, he is performing the max contraction, max performance. And for me, this is pretty fundamental, because heel rise, I would say, heel rise test is most of the most well-known test, in rehab, but it's the test that, you have 1,000 version. If you look at all the different aspects on, that's why I really like the last paper of Green that mentioned and that, say that instruction matter in terms of this test. And if you follow the instruction that I told you, so also the metronome and follow a rhythm, if you put great and phasive standardization on that, you don't have a guy that performing 60 rep on this test. And sometimes I heard what is erase test, and the practitioner told me, it's good, 65 rep, and to my say it's impossible. I never seen a guy that performing 65 rep if you follow this really strict instruction. So I like this paper. It shows so that a guy that was at 65 without instruction, so you just reps to failure. You don't standardize knee flexion, vertical projection. If he's not at max intensity, that's that's not a big deal, and so on. And that there is a guy in the study, and many guys that lost 30 reps when they're performing this test another time, but with standardization. So that's why when you want to evaluate heel rises, that's for me good things. And after, if you go back to the MTP, and I evaluate the MTP joint strength. Now mainly, if that's depend on what I use. I have a custom made thing that I created during my PhD. But it's only lab setting, which is pretty, very precise, very reproducible, really good. But from a practice, I use the force frame settings, where I put my toes on the ear. The man is in sitting position. So I would say the same that on the soleus, but the reverse is it's just that my force captor is under the toes, and I also really put great fixation of not performing plantar flexion in compensation. So I'm use now this setting, or I could use also NL dynamometer, the same setting that I put on the SportsSwiss article, for example. And yeah, so I have took out the first the forefoot strength or the first race strength. If you have to have an evaluation of a ray, that's the first ray, which is the stronger ray on your foot. And so if you want to work on that from an isolation things, the first, as I told you, that if you want put everybody together, I think that performing heel rise or ankle push-off or the in on incline plate or with dorsiflex position of the toes, that increase the midfoot and the forefoot contribution. That's a good one to put everybody together. And also because you have during your your propulsion, so after mid stance, your heel start to rise, and you are in a propulsion or push-off phase during locomotion, and so you have a plantar flexion in regards to a dorsiflex MTP joint dorsiflexion. So you have a plantar flexion on the talocrural joint from the ankle, and in the same and in reverse, sorry, you have a dorsiflex, I will say, position of the two. And that's why this kind of exercise is pretty interesting, because it's really linked also to the biomechanical range or I would say position of the MTP during your push-up phase. So that's pretty a good thing. The other thing is to target the first ray also during your heel raises, for example. And that's why I'm creating a custom brick, where I put a hole. You have big hole under my brick, on where I put the Lesotho in the hole, and you only have your first ray on the ground, and you perform heel raises on that. That's pretty good. I would say things also to increase the contribution of the first ray during your push-off. So that's also, and you can have custom made, or in some weight disc, you have some hole sometimes, so you can also try to manage this also with this from a I would say very homemade exercise.
Yeah.
And if you want to improve the MTP joint strength from isolation, I think that 4-foot max isometric. So for example, single leg stance, when you want to push the harder that you can on the plate or on the incline plate. So here you have a forwarding and you increase your body overload. If you overload your body, you also have a big activation or big torque around the MTP joint. So there will be a study that will look at this, a study by one of the best for me researcher around foot muscle, Luke Kelly from Australia, and he did a study where he has multiple foot exercise, and what he showed is that the exercise that produce less or small amount of activation and less torque around MTP joint was the short foot, and the best one to I will say have great activation and great MTP joint torque production was just being on one leg, forwarding and performing maximal isometric or even a little bit heel rise. So that's why that my kind of stronger approach, that not what I'm famous about, but what people try to implement now, is that your foot is pretty versatile. So if you want to increase very rapidly, and you can have some crazy strength gain in a short amount of time in comparison to other muscle. So your MTP tooth flexor, really like body overload, forward lean, and I say max isometric contraction. So that's really what they perform and what they perform during locomotion, because all the things around to coordination, to spread out all these tricky things, they are not from a neurophysiological perspective or properties. They are not made for that. They don't. They have less motor units in regards to your hand muscles that have less volume but much more motor units, and in regard your foot muscle have much more volume but less motor units. So they are pretty made, or I would say created for generating high forces and not generating fine precision control. Yeah. That's why I always say that we want hands instead of feet, because sometimes, and because people struggling to do it, we always have this guy that, you want to teach him to do a perfectly good hallux extension while performing air, and he's struggling during your 1 month. Because from a spinal, supraspinal, and neurophysiological perspective, that's pretty difficult for sure. Yeah, it's it's the same for the hand muscles. It's less. It's much more difficult also to hands muscle to produce the same amount of force than the toes. So generating high force is pretty difficult for the foot, for the hands muscle also. So I don't think that we have to, put the same exercise for the two.
You're going to put some marble production companies out of business by people now doing marble pickups with their toes. So,
Yeah.
and I guess
that's the same. But
yeah,
if your athlete is a chimpanzee, for sure pick a marble or performing two coordination or grasping. Yeah, because it's funny. I'm writing my manuscript during my PhD thesis, and I read a lot of literature around the evolution, of the foot from the chimpanzee, so from arboreal locomotion, from bipedal locomotion. At the foot is the structure that has the major evolution from a anatomical perspective. So the robust calcaneus, the pronounced arch. You have I would say a digit that is a little bit less in terms of length and so on, an adducted hallux. So and from a neurophysiological properties, that's the same. The fit from grasping to supporting body weight, that's not the same. So that's why we have to be very clear with our exercise. Sorry, try to mimic this. Yeah.
I think if your athlete's a chimpanzee is probably the best clickbait moment of this conversation I can create. And I guess I guess like the last big sort of rock of this one is the foot and ankle behaving as a spring.
Yeah.
In terms of sort of the importance of that, what do you think we need to know, and then maybe we could touch on again assessment and training off the back of it.
So spring mass model, we know that for sure it's at huge importance in terms of running economy for sure, but also for force production, transmission to the ground. Achilles tendon and medial arch have spring qualities, meaning that they store and release energy thanks to the elastic component. We know that, so the calf is dedicated to that. So long fascicle, I would say, muscle length in regards to a long tendon, and the extrinsic is the same, and the intrinsic is also the same. So all the foot ankle complex muscle are dedicated, I would say, to stretch and recovery. But that's why being strong around the muscle. So if you increase the muscle stiffness of your intrinsic, of your extrinsic, or your calf, you, I would say, permits for your tendon, to store much more energy also. So that's why force max strength is a really good, I would say, component to be able to be spring. But there is a but for sure. But we found in our PhD, in my PhD, sorry, that if you have a great calf strength and great forefoot strength, that doesn't allow you, or that's not related to having a good reactive strength sentence index on pogo jump, for example. So that's also another quality. So you have some foundation to have, but if you have both, so max strength, so max isometric strength on the forefoot and on the calf, that doesn't be correlated to for sure being, very good at performing pogo jump. So that's why that this foot ankle muscle are dedicated to spring. And if the most important thing for me in terms of I would say training, it's what I call the flight posture discipline. And I always say to my athletes or my colleagues that if you want to improve foot ankle plyometrics capabilities, you if you don't, I would say, focus on how is the foot and ankle during flight time, you will not be very good, or you will not allow the foot and ankle to improve itself to be a better spring. So what I mean by that is, I always see some athletes just performing jump on the foot and ankle, but keeping their foot and ankle in plantar flex position during flight time. And you can, it's the same that for what I said about you can performing 1,000 hours of shop cutting to improve foot ankle absorption, but it won't change things if you go back to the basic of foundation. And for me, the foundation is the coordination of your, I would say, dorsiflex muscle and your calf. So meaning that if you use a dorsiflexion, or if you are able to dorsiflex your ankle during flight time and have a much more neutral position during ground strike interaction, will allow you to have all your elasticity that will came from your Achilles tendon for sure and on your arch. But having properly this good, flight posture discipline could take time, because, there are really people are so struggling to just have a rhythmic foot ankle coordination, just doing that. So just doing so rapid, foot ankle plantar flexion, dorsiflexion very rapidly. So all the penguin marches, all this, for me, it's a good foundation to start on before doing any jump. So just, feel that your athlete is capable of using this dorsiflex muscle to have a better flight posture discipline, because we know that I have some great data around kinetics when you are much more what I call tooth landing and might foot landing. And all the tooth landing have, less early spike drain reaction forces. So less catapult effect, and so they are less efficient and for having this. So if I have one advice around this spring foot ankle is that that's really this. And sometimes you just say, okay, we do some jump and that's all, not focusing on any technical things and so on. But for me, that's the game changer around foot ankle plyometric, is that this coordination of the foot, of the plantar flexion and dorsiflexion, that's the thing that allow you after this to start to build your plyometric protocol and focusing on low contact time and jump height for sure. And one aspect also maybe is that for some sports and so on, or if you come back for injury around the arch. That's cool to do some pogo jump on incline plate because that will increase your pronation moment and your arch deformation. That's pretty cool to add. And in reverse, when you are in much more lateral ankle sprain rehab or chronic ankle instability state, I think that in reverse, the supination pogo jump, because it's dangerous, I would say like that, or increase your inversion moment, that's pretty also some great things to add in your rehab. And changing also the surfaces of the floor. We know that the foot is pretty versatile. So if you have a really damping surfaces, for example, I don't know, for the damping, just I mean that it's just dissipating energy but don't generating nothing. So don't help you, I would say. So if you work on these different kind of surfaces, that's pretty interesting. Also, if you want to work on muscle fatigue and work on muscle I would say fascicular length because we know that the fascicular length it's pretty isometrics and the tendon that stretch and so on. But if you want to have what I call plyometric muscle exercise, work on dumping surface, it's pretty interesting also. And in reverse, if you have on the early stage of an Achilles tendon surgery, for example, work on the spring surface will help you to, for sure, dissipating and generating energy, and the foot and ankle will doing less work. And that's pretty cool in early rehab to allow you to do that. So yeah, don't forget that, in terms of the spring capacity, the foot and ankle is versatile and is, if you don't help him, he will try to do more. And if we help him, he has only a good proprioceptive, I would say, efference, and he knows that the floor or the shoes, I would say, performing some biomechanical on positive or negative work, and so he will decrease his muscle activation and so on. So yeah, work also on that, I would say. Yeah,
it sounds like we've kind of got two different sort of spring analogies to decipher between in our coaching eye then. So kind of like if somebody can do pogos but get into dorsiflexion and generate the work quickly, we've got that stiff spring that we want, versus if someone's hanging down in plantar flexion the whole time and it then, it's like a slinky, one of those like children's toys that is a very sloppy spring that they're using.
Yeah. And that's not saying that being in plantar flex it's really bad, but from an economic kind of, just, for example, running economy or metabolic cost, you don't help your elastic structure, so it will be much more difficult from that. So that's why, I think that it's the same. How much is too much in terms, of dorsiflex position during ground strike interaction? We don't really know for sure, but we know that this kind of technical competency could be. I have some athletes that change this strategy just after some external cue, just in one session. But I'm struggling with some athletes just, performing multiple sessions to be able to have this. So, that's a foundation that could be very rapid for some and very long for that. But that's why we like our job. If it's too easy, it's not funny also. So yeah.
I'm aware I've taken a lot of your time today. In terms of like the foot and ankle, is there anything I haven't asked you, or is there anything I haven't given you the opportunity to say that that you want to get out there before we talk about where people can find you?
No, I think that I just want to say that, don't forget that really, I really insist around that. It's not being biased to say that the foot and ankle during stance phase, this importance is huge. So I think that because I always say to everybody, so just go to the lab, put marker on some guys, find biomechanics that will help you in terms of visualization and result analyzing, but you will see that the foot and ankle in any task is pretty important in terms of contribution. So don't forget also to maybe have some focus around foot and ankle when you do some lower limb treatment, and even more, or I will say, have a focus when your patient or athletes have history of foot ankle surgery or multiple lateral ankle sprain and being in chronic ankle instability state. I think that sometimes will allow you to be holistic on that, on the lower limb, even more with this kind of athlete, that because we know that because sometimes they underload and not properly rehab, they still have big deficit that create big biomechanical impairments, and that could be a game changer around your lower limb rehab. So I would say that's my advice around that, but not I'm not saying that you have to always look at the foot and ankle in every rehab pathology, but in this, I will say, history of foot ankle surgery with the cast, or Achilles surgery and so on, or lateral ankle sprain, you have maybe some time to focus on just check about the foot and ankle during your lower limb rehab. Because that's a huge important complex in terms of biomechanics.
Cool. And obviously you've referenced throughout this your research, and we'll in the show notes and the episode description we'll put a link to probably your research gate, and then you've obviously mentioned the article you wrote for Sportsmith, which I'd urge people to go and read. It's fantastic. Where else can people find you and follow you to kind of see what you're up to?
So I have all my scientific articles on ResearchGate, so just Romain Tourillon. I always put all my articles in open access. So sometimes I paid to be in open access because you have to pay to be in open access. But all my articles, scientific, is open access. And I also have my much more what I say applied or dissemination articles, which I want one for Aspetar, which the name is Miracles, and I have two in Sportsmith. Also, if you are interested in with some video, also some exercise. And after, Romain Tourillon on Twitter or Instagram. Very happy to respond, answer to some questions. And if you want much more, I will say, or I can say, serious things and project and consulting things and so on. So Romain.Tourillon at gmail.com also. So my private personal address, email.
Cool. Well, really appreciate the absolute knowledge bombs and information you've shared today, and thank you for your time. It's great from a selfish perspective, I really wanted to pick your brains, and I've no doubt there's an army of listeners that get a lot out of this episode too. So thank you very much for coming on the show, mate.
Thanks, and it's always happy to talk about this. Great topic, I think. So thanks for the invitation. That was a pleasure.
Likewise.